Hi, I'm Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Death Grips, an incendiary, abrasive group that in a very short space of time, in only 7 years, have created such an impression on the music world, on fans of music. You know, in that very relatively short space of time, they've released a whirlwind of genre-hopping records, genre-defying pieces of music. Their style is a collision of hip-hop, punk, hardcore, electronic, IDM, noise, and this is partly why I wanted to talk about them in a guide, because I think there's so much to say about this band, and I also think it's testament to their raw talent that everyone's favourite Death Grips record seems to be a different one, and that's a real testament that there is really so many different things to like about this band, different perspectives on their work, and I'm sure there'll be little pockets in the comment section of people arguing about which is their best record, and I hope to join you guys in doing that. Some of you have said, why are you doing a guide on such a new artist? Usually I do guides on people like Björk, David Bowie, Brian Eno, people who have a whole career spanning discography. In comparison, Death Grips is only about 7 years. But I feel like there is so much here to talk about. The number of DMs and messages I get from people saying, where should I start with Death Grips? Because that might be weird to you people who are already fans of Death Grips, but you know, there's quite a lot of material to check out now. There's the instrumental side, the instrumental releases, there's the main records, there's the earlier stuff before Ex-Military. There's some stuff that I think was definitely worth talking about, so that is why I'm doing it. Before I jump in properly, next month's guide will be Tom Waits, which is a big old meaty guide that I cannot wait to start, so I hope you will join me next month for the release of that one. Death Grips are a trio hailing from Sacramento, California, getting together at the tail end of 2010. A very talented group. We have Zach Hill, the explosive drummer known for his very frenetic blast beats and mathy wizardry with a band like Hella, a great math rock band. If you've never checked them out, you need to check them out. So he's on percussion here. You have Andy Morin, or Flatlander as he's sometimes known, who produces most of the record alongside Zach, but he does a lot of the production duties, also bass guitar work as well. And we have the one and only Stefan Burnett on vocals, aka MC Ride. An incredibly cryptic and secretive band. They go about things very different to most artists, and there's a surprising amount of controversy in this relatively short period of time. We have a botched record label deal, we have gig cancellations as performance art, we have a brief disbanding, and the only interviews you'll be able to find with these guys is from around 2011, 2012, and after that it's really down to speculation. So it makes them an even more fascinating entity that you can't get into the mind of them because they refuse to sit down and do interviews anymore, which is actually quite refreshing. Death Grips have become known as the band of the internet, or the meme generation. You know, I think some of that's their sporadic involvement with 4chan, and it's the fact that they seem to inspire something in our generation that we just can't get enough of. And in the music community, you see that with Death Grips fans. It's everywhere, and I think they just inspire people's imaginations, and I think part of that is due to not having too much activity, not too many interviews, much more cryptic than other bands. I think that's a big part of this performance that Death Grips is, because I think that's what it is. It's like a piece of performance art, and that's what people like Zach said back in 2011 when they were doing interviews. This makes them feel very present as a group, despite having a fairly fractured relationship with their fans and members of the media. But anyway, let's start at the beginning. Death Grips exploded onto the scene with their debut EP, self-released and containing the excellent single Full Moon Death Classic. What a way to introduce yourself. You have a clattering percussive rhythm that's nigh on impossible to catch onto. You have moments of this seething sub-bass, and you have those uncompromising vocals of MC Ride introduced to you straight away. The stomping middle section introduces a hint of melody before going back to that very intense opening sound. It's still one of my favourite Death Grips tracks to this day. Other tracks like Death Grips, Next Grips and Face Melter respectively show how interested the band already are in overdriven guitar tones and sampling, and I think that's why I like this debut EP so much, because it's far away from playing it safe, and this is the first thing they put out. And the people that copped this EP when it first landed on the scene must have been salivating at the prospect of what would come next for this band. That second track I was talking about, Face Melter, actually samples the track Attitude by Bad Brains, so already you can see where that sort of hip-hop punk dual label that they get given begins to come from. The 6-song EP had a number of tracks which ended up making it onto their first proper release, a release which really started to gather some momentum behind the trio. 2011's Ex-Military released for free on the band's website. Based on a couple of early interviews, it seems that perhaps the band's caustic style is maybe informed or perhaps encouraged by their home city of Sacramento, a city that's rife with socio-political and criminal problems. For an interview with NME, linked in the description, Zach talks about how medieval the city feels with regards to the division of the rich and poor, and mentions that days before the interview, a woman decapitated herself on a nearby train track. And you really cannot deny the aggressive, caustic sound of their music, pretty fully realised already on this ex-military mixtape album, whatever you want to call it. What better way to start a belligerent record than with a sample of Charles Manson talking? It's quite a combative thing to do, isn't it? And it's very Death Grips, and they're already cementing their style with the opening of this track. The overdriven guitars that frame this track are actually a sample from Up the Beach by Jane's Addiction. And you also have this actually quite uplifting horn melody, which is taken from the track God Is Watching You by Dickie Burton. As you'll end up realising with a lot of Death Grips music, MC Ride is like the nuclear catalyst of their sound. The music can be doing almost anything, yet Ride is always uncompromising with what he's doing. He's unexpected. The things that he does define this band. And that's not to say that the production isn't fascinating, because we will come to some instrumental releases that are really quite great, but they don't really feel like Death Grips releases. You know, Ride really does, he is Death Grips. Without MC Ride, Death Grips wouldn't be what it is, because his vocal is so uncompromising, it's so recognisable, and I feel like he drives forward every record. He does so from the beginning of ex-military, and he continues to do so throughout their career. It's almost a kind of rhythmic and then sometimes arrhythmic spoken word on a lot of their tracks, on a lot of their records. It's a very unique kind of delivery. Ex-military is full of great tracks, and it's seen by most people as their most traditional hip-hop record, but it's still anything from traditional. However, things only get weirder from here on out. Guillotine is a fan favourite. You have the slow electronic beat allowing this crackling bass synth presence to rev up and then fall back over and over again, and it creates this kind of malignant atmosphere. Tachyon was on the EP, but it appears here with a much fuller production, or it feels like a much fuller production. You have the track Culture Shock, which just sounds like the most fucked up dial tones made into a song. It's almost like it's the soundtrack to the dark net, coursing through cabling like some kind of virus. As an aside, there's a great mashup of Culture Shock and the Clams Casino track I'm God, which I swear I'm listening to all the time, so I will link that in the description below, because it's a really good mashup. Zach has mentioned in a past interview that they consider ex-military as their first record, and I mention that because I don't want people to forget about it. I don't want you to miss it out when you're checking out this discography. It's a solid record. There's some genuinely clever sampling in here. You get a real taste of what Death Grips is about, and I think it serves as a very good jumping off point if you're looking for an entry point into this discography. That same year, the great alternative hip-hop label Death Bomb Arc released the Live in Death Valley single, which was actually two very short tracks put together. We had Poser Killer and Fired Up. Even less melodic and more noxious than the tracks on ex-military, this little single felt as if the band were teeing up for an even more intense record. Was anyone prepared for that? So a crazy start from the Sacramento group, but now we reach 2012, which is arguably the most important year in the history of the band. You know, this is the year where Death Grips became not a household name, because that would be mental if, you know, your nan had heard of Death Grips. Maybe she has, I'm not judging. If she has, wicked. I think, yeah, this is the year that you couldn't really move for seeing Death Grips articles online, or hearing about Death Grips, or hearing about how great Death Grips were. So I think this is the year that they became much more of a force to be reckoned with, and one that you couldn't really ignore. Signing with Epic Records at the beginning of 2012, we were told we would get 2 Death Grips records in a year, and sure enough, in April 2012, The Money Store was released. At this point, the cult of Death Grips had spread online to places like 4chan and Reddit, and become this obsession. People couldn't stop talking about what this band were doing and how unique they sounded. It's hard to fathom how this record is already 6 years old. I actually cannot get my head around that. With The Money Store begins this knotty and fascinating convergence of ideas from their previous releases. So if you're eagle-eared, you may notice that the poisonously dancey track Hacker actually uses a sample from the track Poser Killer from the Live in Death Valley single. So they're repurposing their material. Or on The Cage, which is surely a highlight and a record chocked full of highlights, they use a sample from the track Next Grips, which was on their debut EP. I love it when groups do this, because it shows that their earlier work is still part of their oeuvre. They still appreciate it, they haven't turned their back on it, and they're willing to repurpose these ideas and create something new. It's actually something that they will return to do in 2018 on their new record, but we will wait to the end of the video to talk about that one. That opening track, Get Got, is for many what cemented Death Grips as a band to watch. It's alien and disorienting on a first listen and probably a second, third and fourth listen. You have those hazy synths and rounded percussion which frame Ryd's delivery, which is maybe less in your face than it has been previously, but with his lyricism still creates this very sort of foreboding atmosphere. Ryd's fractured narrative details a police getaway and contains lines like tailpipe dragging, volume blasting, bailing out my brain, red light flash, dem I stop I smash, Abraxas, hydroplane, massive. Notice that reference to the Egyptian god there. Drilled a hole into my head, pierced the bone and felt the breeze, lift my thoughts out them sick bed with a pair of crow skeleton wings. Alongside this narrative journey, Ryd's referencing things like trepanning and ancient gods, and I think it underlines his wit and intelligence as an artist, and I want to underline that myself because I think that sometimes his lyricism can be forgotten because there's so much. It's such a barrage listening to Death Grips music that you're going to forget to check out what the lyricism's like, and often he has got something to say, that there's like ideas in that lyricism that are really worth checking out and reading. Sometimes they don't always have a narrative like this track does, and that's part of the purpose. But nevertheless, he is a great lyricist, and I think Get Got's a really good example of that. I've Seen Footage is surely an homage to Salt and Pepper's Push It. I mean, the songs sound so similar, and it's the first time that we really see Death Grips playing with melody more and creating a catchy track. I mean, Try Not Moving to that track, it is great. It also helped popularize the popular noided Death Grips meme, shortened for paranoid, and that's become a big part of the Death Grips experience online. So if you've seen that and you didn't know what that meant, then there you go. Hustlebone's synthesized voices provide respite in the chorus from that drilling into concrete synth sound from the verse. Double Helix put Zach to the fore with this processed, skittering electronic beat that in some ways echoes those math rock records that he was involved in the early noughties. True to their DIY ethos, the band put the full record up on YouTube and as a download on their site for free, which I imagine already started putting a strain on this relationship with Epic Records. I mean, they're such a DIY band in their approach anyway that it seemed like a strange decision to go with a record label in the first place, and as we will see, it didn't really work out that well. This wasn't helped by the band all of a sudden cancelling their international tour in order to start working on the second record of 2012, the follow-up to the Money Store, No Love Deep Web. By far my favourite Death Grips record, No Love Deep Web takes the off-the-wall abrasion of the Money Store and it pares things back a little bit. Not the menace, mind you, the menace is here in even greater clarity than before, and I think a lot of that is to do with them paring back the record sonically, the paring back their sound a little bit. They relish every single layer, every single sound that they include on this, and I think that's because there's less of it. The actual sonic palette is less intense, and as a result, it feels like it's even more focused sonically. And I think it's a really great pairing of Ryd's vocals as well. I feel like Ryd's vocals stand out even more on this record than they did on the Money Store. I've picked the censored version for this video because, YouTube love to demonetize at the drop of a hat or the whipping out of a knob, but that is indeed behind that black mark, Zach Hill's penis. I love the story behind this record. So disenfranchised already by their relationship with Epic, they were being ignored, people weren't answering phone calls, they couldn't get their music listened to by label managers. They decided to hole up in the Chateau Marmont Hotel on Hollywood Boulevard for 2 months to work on the album, and this was their way, in their words, of infiltrating the lifestyle of the people that were at the label. Because they were coming from very different socioeconomic backgrounds, they thought, let's try and live the life that they live. There's a couple of interviews where they say that it would be a normal thing for people that were working alongside the label, some of those label managers, to stay at the Marmont for a couple of months, despite it being a very expensive place to stay, it being quite a decadent place to stay. For them, that wasn't a normal thing, so they felt by doing that, they're infiltrating a different lifestyle and seeing a different vision of the world than they're used to. To that end, this biting record represents the truth under the wealth. It's the grime and filth that permeates our sweaty existence, even down to that album art. There's a truth and a hilarity in using a luxurious hotel bathroom in the Chateau Marmont to take a photo of your penis and upload it to an aggressive experimental hip-hop punk hardcore record. There's something great in that. The title itself reminding everyone that there is a place underneath the conventional internet that most people wouldn't dare to go. The prevalence of samples diminishes on this record too, and again I think that's a great move. The trio would prefer to work with their own sounds, and the sounds that they create on this record are top notch. That pulverizing bass that fizzes in your ears on Come Up and Get Me accompanies this percussive backline which hangs back in the mix. You know, things aren't as maximalist as in The Money Store, and all that does, I think, is spotlight Ride and these instrumentals even more. I mean, Ride specifically, every plosive he fires off ricochets around the mix. The death march of No Love is psychosis in music form. Zach's drums are all of a sudden acoustic and heavy, cutting through with these hi-hats that absolutely seethe. I'm unsure what's happening to Ride at this moment, but his lyrics really sum up the intensity of this track. Swallowed way too much, couldn't handle it, I fell. Down a spiral staircase, winding to hell. Hill's acoustic drums are fused with electronic triggers on World of Dogs, so we get this kind of insane swung ride rhythm before descending into complete digital chaos. On the disgusting Deep Web, there is a particular lyric that always sticks out to me, which is, I am the coat hanger in your man's vagina. You know, it's kind of offensive without really meaning a great deal, and I think it shows that the band want to make their audience, make their listeners feel uncomfortable. It's part of that punk ethos that they embody, and that is part of what makes this LP so brilliant. It's a phenomenal release, No Love Deep Web. As brilliant as The Money Store is and Ex-Military, for me this was really the moment where Death Grips got their shit together in the best way possible and created something amazing. Ironically, the band actually released No Love Deep Web through BitTorrent, and I think that was part of antagonizing the label and trying to just split that relationship, which was about to happen anyway. You know, the label was sick of what was happening, the band was sick of what was happening. Time to go. In a rare interview with Pitchfork, Zach actually talked about this, and here's a snippet. It seemed positive and realistic, like it could totally work, and these people at Epic actually got the music. But when we signed in November 2011, we couldn't have predicted that our whole team would be fired this August. We were left with zero real contacts at the label, and we couldn't get people to listen to the new music. We don't regret the action of starting out with them, but it became apparent that it wasn't working out, and we needed to put ourselves back where we had total control over what we were doing. Let's be honest, they were better off without anyway. They are a DIY band, they're doing it themselves, and as such they need to be their own masters. Thus their own label Third World was created so they could release things and do whatever the hell they wanted. In a surprising turn, the band remixed a couple of tracks for Björk's Bastards remix album, which was based on the Biophilia record. And I think it's such a great example of this band already getting credence with large artists, influential artists like Björk. You know, their reputation was becoming quite sizable in as little as a year. I can't remember the last time a band really shot up into the creative limelight so quickly. So, freed from major label issues, it had them poised to release their follow-up record in 2013 titled Government Plates, which took the sawtooth electronics of No Love Deep Web, and it pushes those ideas out even further. Everything on Government Plates feels uglier, more corrosive than it ever did before. You know, if we're heading down to the abyss, then Government Plates is the splash at the bottom, and we're all covered head to foot in non-specific inky fluid. I think of this record as what The Money Store did in Approach, but with the palette of No Love Deep Web. You know, it throws a lot at you as a listener, and it can be quite challenging when you first hear it. Again, released as a free download on their site, fans listened to a band that had decided to spin their music into a kaleidoscopic hellscape. I mean, their music had always been unique up until this moment, but it feels almost as if Government Plates has no reference point. It's unapologetically experimental, and there are bangers on this record, but never in the conventional sense. Ride, Andy and Zach unveil their mission statement on opening track. You might think he loves you for your money, but what he really loves you for is your leopard skin pillbox hat, a mouthful, with the smashing of a bottle, a screeching sample, and then Ride alternating between this a rhythmic rapping and screaming before the entire trio slam into this thick half-time riff. It's such a bold opening, and those psychotic yet poetic lyrics from Ride only heighten that sense. I hover above you, life pulled out your mouth. I become you, opening of the mouth. Unlawful possession, jellyfish in cold sweat deep end. Hollow shell, twitch, disconnection, pupils swell. The trio want to throw right angles at you over and over again, and they do that like on that half-time riff on Anne Bonny, which then lurches into that hip-hop beat. You have the change up onto Heavens, you have those spliced vocals at the beginning of the track I'm Overflow. I love the almost euphoric synth tone on title track Government Place, because it seems like it skirts around that idea of the Hotline Miami outrun, neon-drenched cityscape sound, but in typical Death Grips fashion, it of course subverts your expectations. A piece that's mostly instrumental, it fits in with those final 4 tracks, which do shift the gears of the record slightly. They become more instrumental, more textural, and Ride's vocals start to be used more as an additional texture rather than a focal point like they were on some of the earlier tracks and on No Love Deep Web. That pulsing 4-to-the-floor beat on Big House, which dissipates into that menacing line, LA creeping under my skin. So good. Around this time, the band started to cultivate a bit of controversy because there were cancelled gigs. Now, they weren't turning up to gigs. There was one specific gig they didn't turn up to, and the fans raided the stage. And they realised that actually the kit that was there was a toy drum kit, and then the band acted as if this was some kind of performance piece. So whether you appreciate that or not, I imagine the people waiting to watch the band were pretty pissed off with that. There was also a suicide note that was fabricated. Mirroring the chaos of their music, things all got a little bit mad on the periphery. During what is now a famous performance, Zach Hill decided not to attend a gig and play his entire drum part via Skype, which was then projected onto the wall. And that just, for me, that just really drills down to the anarchic humour of this project, and it's almost as if because they finally were freed from Epic, they were able to realise how off the wall this project was becoming, and that was coming out in all of these different performance pieces in their music as well. Things only got more controversial and convoluted from here on out. In June 2014, the band announced we would be getting a double album called The Powers That Be, but the second half, Jenny Death, would be released later in the year. So to start off with, we got a free download of the first half of the record, Blanks on the Moon. Yeah, I'm not saying it, am I? This first half of The Powers That Be takes the palette of No Love Deep Web, Government Plates, and it adds a twist. So this time, we have a new vocal presence alongside Ride, and that is Björk. So obviously, that experience doing the Bastards remixes created some kind of artistic friendship between the trio and Björk, and she allowed her vocals to be used as found objects throughout the entirety of this first half of The Powers That Be. So her voice is included in these tracks, but it's chopped up and stretched and defiled to add to this nightmarish music that they create. As much as her vocals are twisted, it's never beyond recognition. Her presence is still there. You can still tell it's Björk. And there's something about her feminine voice adding that, which creates a kind of hypnotic quality to their music, which I can't say I really felt prior to the release of this record. It's just another move forward in their discography. It's a move forward in their artistic ideas, and I love that. On the slow grind of Up My Sleeves, Björk's voice sounds as if it's trapped in a glass prism, and it's bouncing off of each surface until it dejectedly floats back down again. Her floaty vocal is sliced on Billy Not Really, fusing with this synthetic chord and the skittering of electronic hi-hat triggers. Say Hey Kid is one of my favourite tracks on the record. It utilises that more minimalistic vibe of the No Love Deep Web tracks, and you have this accented 2 and 4 beat with the snare, and Ride is very much at the forefront of this track, delivering these slow lines before ramping up to this chorus. I guess you call it a chorus. It's very much a focal point of the track, and it really does ramp up, and then it all falls back down to this very heavy, lethargic verse. And it's like a precursor to Have a Sad Come Baby, surely the most meme-tastic of all of the Death Grips tracks. I mean, in name alone, we have this vocal snippet from Björk, which is repeated to the point where you feel almost nauseous as you listen to it, especially because it's over this litany of muddy percussion. The whole thing just feels very in your face. It's a lot to take in. It's strange and obfuscated, but and it has that repetition of the line "Have a Sad Come Baby," which is partly why it's become such a great meme. The Hypnotic Big Dipper finishes a record that I think opens up the more and more that you listen to it, and it is yet another reminder of this band's uncompromising artistic vision. And it's great to hear them take this found object of Björk's vocals and use it to create a whole new record, something we haven't heard from them before. They just keep on surprising you every single time. All of a sudden though, out of nowhere, the band decided to break up. They posted a picture of a message on a napkin on their social media, thanking everyone, but they were at their best and that it was time to end things. And this involved cancelling a huge support slot with Nine Inch Nails and Soundgarden, which again probably pissed a lot of people off. But again, that's part of what they are. They weren't actually done with Death Grips though, despite that feeling like the final throes of the band. I don't know whether they had a genuine change of heart or if this was just another performance piece, and I'm inclined to go with the latter based on some of their previous antics. But in January of 2015, on the Third World site, the Fashion Week project dropped, which was one, containing no MC Ride vocals, and two, the cover art had Sue Yu on the front of it, who drew the now infamous Money Store artwork. Fashion Week has some genuinely riveting cuts on it, and it's a great opportunity for Andy and Zach to show off their production skills. I know I said previously that it wouldn't be Death Grips without Ride, and I do believe that, but also this proves that these two are so integral to the sonic barrage of their music. Without these two, it also wouldn't be Death Grips. Runway N sounds like a hellish fairground ride. Runway D is surprisingly light and airy, and you could almost dance to it and almost hear it in a club situation. It's more like an IDM record than anything they'd done before. But most importantly, the track title spelt out an acrostic which read, "Jenny Death When," which was a cry that fans had been screaming out on the internet ever since the band split. People were worried whether they were actually going to get the second half of the Powers That Be. When were we going to hear Jenny Death? Again, it's them playing with expectations. It's like, we know you're waiting for this, and we're going to show you that we know you're waiting for this. It's just them messing around again. So in March 2015, as promised, the second half of the Powers That Be arrive, and it's Jenny Death. For me, this is the weakest release they've ever put out, and it does change tact again because they never seem to really rest on their laurels, but it finds Zach and Andy utilising overdriven guitars way more than they ever have before. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but it's a much more straightforwardly aggressive way of communicating your intent, and I think in some ways it comes off less compelling than the things that they've done on previous records. There's some absolute bangers on this record, no doubt about that, and I will come to those in a minute. But the effect of this record is just less immediate for me, it has less impact, and it feels less fully realised. There's more of a hardcore influence to this record than to any of their previous records, and it's there in that galloping opening track, "I Break Mirrors with My Face in the United States." Great title, just definitely out there with one of their best titles. And it's a compelling way to start a record. It's aggressive, but it is very straightforward. Once you've heard the beginning of the track, you pretty much understand the entire track. And that's not always the way they've operated with their opening tracks. It just shows a slight shift in focus and approach on this record. Part of that more hardcore guitar-based influence comes from the Nick Reinhardt feature that we have on this record. Now, Nick Reinhardt is known for being in Terra Melos, a great math rock band. So some of that influence comes from him being on these sessions and contributing to the band's sound on Jenny Death. Second track, Inanimate Sensations, one of my favourite of the entire discography. You have that demented collection of voices echoing around that terrifying revving of the saw-like synth which scoops and repeats over and over again. It sounds like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It reminds me of Leatherface going there with his saw revving up and all these voices terrified, blood-curdling. It creates such a great atmosphere, this track. The track The Powers That Be is an interesting one because it is so much more conventional. At the centre of it has this head-banging riff, and Zach and Andy are really going for it on the back line. It almost sounds like just a hard rock track, which is not something that they've particularly done before. And that sound is there again with On GP, which is essentially a noise rock track. Again, you might not expect to hear that from these guys that have been creating glitchy electronic hip-hop IDM tracks, but they're here again to subvert your expectations, and they do absolutely do that. Some really immediate cracking tracks on Jenny Death, but I do believe that it's their least consistent and least interesting record to date. Come at me with alternative opinions. Now apparently back together and making new music again, maybe or maybe not. I mean, everyone's massively confused at this point. We finally get the announcement of a new record, Bottomless Pit. Before I talk about that record though, in March of 2016 the band uploaded a YouTube video which had them being interviewed, but all the audio was replaced with what I can only describe as the more twisted, interesting brother of the Fashion Week project. So we have another electronic instrumental release to listen to. The entire thing is on streaming services now, so you should really check this one out. But Andy and Zach really flex their muscles on this one. There's a progression on Interview B, the second track, which blows my mind. I think that they really step it up a notch from Fashion Week, and this is great. And I would love to hear more instrumental stuff off of the back of this release that they did. You know, Interview 2016 is sometimes overlooked, but it really shouldn't be, because it's good. Moving on, in May, Bottomless Pit is released, and by all accounts, it's a triumph. The trio takes some of the directness of Jenny Death, without losing their penchant for compelling sonic landscapes. That title could be a reference to Charles Manson's hideout in Death Valley in California. I say that because of that sample that they used in Beware at the beginning of Ex-Military. There's definitely a fascination with him as a cultic figure. Bottomless Pit begins with giving bad people good ideas, and we get the vocal of Clementine Creevy from Cherry Glazer. She joins for this little refrain, giving bad people good ideas. And the track starts with her vocal alone, and it prepares you for this oral assault. And oh, it does come, because then all of a sudden we have those distorted guitars from Jenny Death propelling the track with Zach's blast beats, and MC Ride's delivery is just as devastating as ever. This record, unlike Jenny Death, doesn't stick with that overdriven guitar sound quite as much, although it is still there, it's just not quite as high in the mix. We have a return of the electronic digitized splutters that were so prevalent on the earlier records, and that really is shown on second track Hothead, which is one of the glitchiest, most despicable tracks they've ever put out, and it sounds as if Ride's having a breakdown with his vocal delivery. Bottomless Pit sees the trio allow space across their soundscapes once again, kind of like they did with something like No Love Deep Web. I know I keep going back to it, but I think it's really integral to their progression as artists, and it makes for a more cohesive sound, and sometimes they've pushed for less melodic tracks, but melody is really out here in full force on this record. Each track has a very memorable hook, and it's the reason why some people thought of Bottomless Pit as a much more conventional record, because it felt more immediate, because you found yourself humming refrains and vocal hooks, I think, more than you probably ever had done before with the Death Grips record. The banging chorus of spikes, the pulsing or the digitized horn sound on Trash, where Ride takes to task the ephemerality of online content. We know Trash, we don't clean, don't last, never last when we load Trash, we upload Trash, face down, Trash begets Trash. The hellish 80808 prefaces the closing track, Bottomless Pit, which in some ways sounds uplifting. I never thought I'd say that with a Death Grips track to this point, but it does sound uplifting, at least musically anyway. I mean, Ride is chanting, "I'll fuck you in half," so I suppose it depends on what you consider to be uplifting. This use of melody is actually quite a good precursor to their next record, which I will get to in a second. But basically, Bottomless Pit, I think it was a return to form. I didn't like Jenny Death all that much, and I think Bottomless Pit is one of their most creatively successful records. It sees them using melody more, using convention slightly more, but not losing their personality as a band, and they just slam it once again. 2017 was a relatively quiet year for the band, except for the fact they released Steroids, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Gabba, a mix which was 22 minutes long, a carcinogenic piece of music which will have you dizzy by the end of listening to it. And if you're not dizzy, well, you probably weren't listening properly. For those of you not aware, Gabba was a type of particularly hardcore techno coming out of Rotterdam. It's had a very small subculture. It's become a little bit of a meme, Gabba, but it hits really hard. And if you go and listen to some of it, you'll have an idea of what these madmen were injecting into their sonic palette for this small mix that they did. It's great to hear them take a different style of music again and completely change up their sound in new ways. And there are so many little nuggets in Steroids that absolutely make it worth your time. There's so much going on here, and this is partly why I love it so much. After what you could call a relatively clean release with Bottomless Pit, in some ways, compared to some of their earlier work, this is just a slab of barraging techno, experimental, industrial, alternative, I've said experimental already. It's mad anyway, basically. And it's just completely unwieldy. Some of Zach's drumming is insane. Andy's production's brilliant. Really, really need to listen to it. Don't miss this one out. Look out for the part that begins around about the 7:40 mark, because it gets me every time, and it is Wonderful. Which brings us to 2018, the year in which we reside, unless of course you're watching this video in 2019 or 2020, in which case this video is like a weird time capsule. Andy, Zach and Rye decided rather than throwing out the whole record at once, they would release tracks sporadically leading up to the record. So there was, I think, 5 tracks released beforehand, and some fans were crying out, you know, no more, we don't want the first listen of the record to be spoiled. And I think, again, that might be a theatrical tactic that was employed because they love messing around with release cycles. They love to change expectations of fans and do things differently, and they're just doing that again here. I, like many, was pretty lukewarm on the tracks that they started releasing. The first one was streaky, and for me it felt quite one note, not very gripping, pardon the pun. The plodding noise rock of Black Paint to me felt like an even more watered down version of Jenny Death, a record I already don't like a great deal. Flies was probably my favourite of those first 3 that were released, but even that was not alongside the most compelling tracks, and I was thinking, what's going on here? However, once we got the final completed record in June 2018 and I got to listen to it start to finish, everything came together spectacularly well, better than I thought it had based on my initial reception to those first 3 tracks. I suppose the art of sequencing is not something that really comes to mind when I listen to other Death Grips records. I just don't really think about it. However, Year of the Snitch particularly is successful because of the way it flows and the context that it gives each track. You know, out of context, I thought that those like Streaky, Flies and Black Paint were relatively weak, but in the context of the entire record, they work really well and they make sense, and all of a sudden they open up. I wonder if the band knew what they were doing with that anyway, because they love trolling fans, they love playing with people's expectations. I wonder if they knew that taking these tracks out of context and giving people so many would lower people's expectations of the record and make them feel a bit disappointed, which subsequently is also the final track title on the record. It's Disappointed. So I just feel like it all works into this theatrical illusion that they have with every single record that they put out, and this is just another one of those illusions. Some of the features on Year of the Snitch are eccentric, to say the least. So we have Andrew Adamson doing the spoken word on Dilemma, and he directed Shrek, which is an interesting collaboration. Justin Chancellor, the bassist of Tool, contributes a little bit as well. And on top of that, we have Lucas Abela, who is a noise artist utilising glass, creating some pretty gruesome performances, as you can tell by some of the images that I'm putting up for you right now. First track, Death Grips is Online, which if you're on Twitter, you will recognise because the band sporadically tweet this and then they will retweet anyone that's tweeting this. It becomes a collective Death Grips is Online meme. The track itself starts where Bottomless Pit left off. It's a surprisingly melodic opening. The chord sequence has a gleeful positivity to it, and although it does lead into a more typically Death Grips verse, it just proves, I think, that the palette and the concept behind this record are even broader than they have been previously. Ha 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 is a nightmarish cut. The production makes everything feel very far away. You can't get close enough to the track. It makes you feel isolated as a listener. The Fear is absolutely my favourite track. It takes a jazzy turn with piano, yeah, piano on a Death Grips record, and Zach's acoustic drum performance, and it keeps you on your toes throughout, just as the rest of the record does. We get this tasty melodic section at the midway point that kind of reminds me of moments in Don Cab's discography, where all the complexity melts away and the band allow this one melody to shine. It's a moment to cherish, and I really love that they're playing with those ideas on this track. One of the things I love about Year of the Snitch is the throwback. So the scream on Linda's in Custody is actually taken from Ride's scream from the first track of Government Plates. The reverb drums at the beginning of Ha 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 are from I Want It, I Need It on Ex-Military. It's like the trio are looking back on their sizable discography amassed in as little as 7 years, and they're picking all these little gems from it. It's almost as if they've come full circle, so they used to rely on the samples of others, and now these trailblazers need only rely on samples of themselves. It's anarchic in some ways. It's also, as a fan, it's delightful to pick out those little sounds, and it just shows that this band are flipping great. I haven't got any more hyperbole to give you. They're a fantastic band. Year of the Snitch is a great record. It grew on me more and more as I listened to it, and I think it's up there with all of their other great records, and it deserves your time. And that is the end of my guide to one of the most daring and original bands of the last decade. You owe it to yourself to check them out. Not everybody's going to like them, but you at least owe it to yourself to see what these guys are about, because there's a lot to love here and there's a lot to be challenged by, and I hope you will go on that journey if you haven't already. Please come join us on the Deep Cuts Discord on Tuesday at 10 o'clock BST to listen to No Love Deep Web. We often do these listening parties after videos are released, and they're always a lot of fun because we get to react together about these albums and this music. So come and have a chat with us. Thanks for watching as always. I'll be back next week with 5 albums to get you into power electronics. See you then.